A ongoing inside joke on the Agile podcast is every time I say, "Oh, I'm going to get picked up as a Scrum Master with a new team," I do my little spit at my disgust for getting picked up as a Scrum Master on a new team, and that is because I have no desire to fight the fights that Scrum Masters fight anymore now that I've done the job of product, basically. Because product doesn't deal with any of that stuff. I guess it's not impossible, but product is much more difficult to kind of marginalize and kind of diminish and also to disempower. That's a word?
It is a word.
Yeah, that's much more difficult to do to product than it is to a Scrum Master. You know, it's also more difficult to not have a product person on your team than to not have a Scrum Master on your team.
Yeah, I'd concur with all of that. I think having said that, though, in many ways, product is actually more difficult or can be more challenging, let me say, right, than doing the job of a Scrum Master. But, you know, if product is ticking your boxes, then yeah, why not? I think they're different in so many different ways that you can't really equate the two in any way.
No. Yeah, no, I agree. They're not the same in any way, shape, or form. But for example, I'm trying to think of concrete examples. Like, for example, when I am in the product role and I say, hey, this team of 12 would be way more efficient if we split it into 2 teams of 6. And then the only person impacted is me, because now I got to go to 2 team events rather than, you know, whatever. But the development team members will be a lot more focused because they'll have a lot less channels of communication. They'll actually be spending less time during their events because their events potentially could be shorter. You know, their refinements and stuff like that they participate in could be shorter. And as a product person, when I say that, the business is like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. Sounds good. Go do it, Brian.
Yeah, now compare that to a Scrum Master who comes in with that same suggestion and says, let's split this team into 2. That really oftentimes doesn't go over well. I mean, most times it's like, oh, why? And to be fair also, though, from a Scrum Master's own personal perspective, they don't want to do that because they have to do twice the events. They have to do, 2 retros, 2 reviews, 2 of everything.
That I get.
2 daily stand-ups.
Yeah.
But so in a way, you mentioned the word, teams will be more efficient, right? It's true. If you break them up into 2, yes. But a Scrum Master's point of view would be, well, I'm impacted in so many ways. There's more burden on me.
Yeah.
So forget about that. I'm not more efficient, right? So from that perspective, they're less likely to put the idea forward. But even if they did, you've got those in middle management that will just say, no, I don't have time to attend 2 reviews and so on. So yeah, I do concur with that.
Yeah, middle management being in reviews, like that's a problem in and of itself. Like if they're somehow in some way, shape, or form representative of users or representing users, then yeah, I get it. But otherwise, I mean, if you're just there to learn about the new products coming out, you can have a separate session, or you can read some kind of documentation or release notes or something afterwards, or there's a better venue for that than
Yeah, my favorite is just get them into a user experience session. Just say, here's what we built. Get your hands on it now.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of somebody operating the puppet on strings, basically, which is what a demo is. The other thing that they do is if they're not vested in learning about the product, is they're just simply taskmasters, looking for efficiency metrics from the team, extracting every little bit of productivity out of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably like the least thing that I'm interested in dealing with. But you deal with all that kind of stuff as a Scrum Master. The other thing that you deal with that you're going to encounter as like, hey, for all the people out there that want to be Scrum Masters, you better start working now to figure out how you're going to deal with this attitude when you encounter it.
Yes, when, not if.
Right? The attitude of, well, what does a Scrum Master do with all their time in the day? So much time in the day. Can one single team really be a full-time job? I can't understand how one single team would be. Don't you really just schedule the events and then attend all the events, but you don't really do anything in the events?
Yeah, you set up meetings and you bring your team some coffee, and you can handle 5 teams easily.
Yeah,
right?
you're going to deal with that. Sure. You're going to deal with that attitude. The attitude of like I'm just judging you based on the perception of what I see you do. So
yeah, and people that expound that kind of viewpoint, they really do not in any way, shape, or form understand the role of a Scrum Master. You're really trying to understand how your team works. You're observing, you're coaching, you're doing all of these things. I guess I'm trying to say that you're really being a servant leader. But if people don't understand that, they're taskmasters, then they say, well, you can definitely handle more than one team.
Yeah.
So yeah, you are going to come across that though, to your point. And so how do you tackle that when somebody says, what do you do all day? What do you do with your time all day?
I mean, I can tell you how not to tackle that. The way that I would not suggest tackling that, which may or may not be the way that I tackle that, is to be like, what do you do with all your day?
Go on the offensive.
Like coding is just writing a bunch of if loops. Like, what's so hard about writing if loops? You write if loops all day. How many if loops are there? Like, come on, man. It's not that hard. Or being a CEO is just rolling into meetings and shouting some orders and then bouncing out without getting any feedback or caring about how people feel about it. Or being a CEO is just about driving a flashy car and showing up between golf games. Like I can fire off just ridiculous one-liners as well. They're not helpful to anyone.
Right. Well, it makes you feel better though.
It makes me feel better, yeah. But again, it's just like the person being like, "Well, I can't imagine the Scrum Master with one team has enough work to fill their entire whatever 40-hour like your work is. You must work in a chair for 40 hours at a desk." I feel their base assumption is already incorrect.
Absolutely.
That they're bringing to the table is what do you do with all your 40 hours? Your company prescribed 45.3 hours. Like, where'd you get that number from, man?
Yeah, it's that utilization mindset. You gotta keep people utilized. So you're right. Yeah, 10 times out of 10, their mindset definitely doesn't accommodate the way a Scrum Master should be working. So maybe another angle on this, as far as like how you might tackle this, would be to say, use the analogy of a sports team. How many sports teams can a head coach?
Yeah.
Right? Because after all, what do? They show up at 5 a.m, kick some balls around, and that's it, right?
I mean,
very much.
Like if we're gonna go with this pedantic attitude to describe everything, then the coach really doesn't do anything. They show up driving their fancy car and they kind of yell at everyone, and they don't actually put their hand on any balls at all. They don't really do a lot of anything.
They draw some squiggles on a whiteboard.
They don't even wear a uniform. They're up there in a polo and some khakis. They wear khakis. I think that's what we're trying to say.
I think the ones that wear hoodies get paid the most.
Yeah, coach just wears khakis. That's what we're trying to say here.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, people really don't understand in that example what a coach does. There's a lot involved in trying to lead a team, not trying to drive a team. So you're not really just simply cracking the whip all the time, because that might give you a little bit of an illusion of progress, and then it will just plummet. Mm-hmm. And the next thing that it will be followed by is churn. People will leave. You'll lose good people if you keep cracking the whip. A good coach will build the team up from the ground. Yeah. And that takes effort. That takes resolve. And it takes the time it takes. So when someone says, what do you do with your time? I build a team. I nurture them, right? And if they don't understand it, there's only one thing you can do, right? Go find greener pastures elsewhere.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say that, but some people just don't get it.
Here's some of the things that are on the Scrum Master list. So instructional, teaching, Scrum. Well, it could be anything, Scrum, Kanban, whatever. Mm-hmm. Teaching the different practices, extreme programming. Teaching extreme programming? I mean, just trying to get them to partner. Lean, Kanban, demonstrate unit testing, refactoring, test-driven development. So basically introducing new and different concepts to the team. And
there are so many of them, right? Estimation, et cetera. So you can keep going.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. What are some other things?
Mentoring is another important part, right?
Yeah, mentoring is a big one, yeah.
Just sharing your experiences, what has worked, and just as importantly, what has not worked, right?
Yeah, and the most effective mentors, coaches, whatever people you're learning from, it doesn't really matter. Like, I think there was a podcast I was listening to recently where they were talking about mentors. Coaches are there when you're part of that team, but when you leave that team, like you leave the coach, but mentors are people that stick with you. Like a mentor and a coach could be the same person, but not necessarily.
Yeah, so the distinction I've heard bandied about is a mentor will share their experience with you, not just to teach you a concept, but also say, this is what's worked in my experience, because they are more experienced than you are. Whereas a coach will ask meaningful questions, powerful questions, and lead you to a conclusion that you wouldn't necessarily arrive at naturally by yourself. Yeah. So they would guide you to where you need to be. I guess that's a better word, right? They would guide you there. A mentor would share their past experience and also share some tips, but largely it comes from, here's where I've come from, this is what's worked, or here's what I've seen work.
Right.
Other people have done this, but this is what I've seen, right?
Yeah. Don't you have to have some kind of level of expertise? I would assume you have to have some kind of level of expertise to begin coaching like that. But we've seen Scrum Masters / coaches with no domain expertise or technical expertise. So would that be more difficult for them, or is it just like it's just like a mantra to just be questioning everything all the time? I don't,
No, because I don't think it's the latter. I think you have to have experience, right? Yeah. I think you have to have taken, the weathering, as it were, have been through the mill a few years, and then you learn from that, and you can share that. The difficulty here is a mentor can easily do that, right? Whereas an effective coach, what they're doing is they're not sharing any solutions with you.
Yeah.
They may have the solutions in their mind, but they're not actively leading you even to those specific end results. What they're really doing is asking clarifying questions and having you see your way through the problem you have.
Yeah.
So to that end, they don't have a conclusion in mind. So they're not vested in, one outcome versus another, right? They're simply talking you through the issue and helping you see that through your mental clarity that they're trying to provide by asking questions. That's why they're asking questions. If you didn't have experience doing that, it would be futile. I think it would just end up being a useless experience at that stage for everybody all around. So you've got to pick your coaches carefully.
Yeah. That's a tough one, because there are some organizations that I've been part of that they're not really run by development, but development heavily influences who they would bring on as a coach. And somebody without deep technical experience would never get their foot in the door in the first place, because they'd get vetoed by development. They would say, this person's never coded. They surely don't know how to interact with my team, because my team, they code all the time, so they must be highly technical. I can never imagine somebody being able to teach us anything because we're so smart.
That works in certain fields, I have to say, first of all, right? That works in certain fields. So let's say you're looking for a senior consulting physician. If they've never been a doctor, if they've never treated patients, especially patients with those specific disorders, right? You're not going to succeed. So it works in those kinds of fields. I feel like in professional coaching, oftentimes what I've seen is this. The coach isn't coming from a development background, because as soon as you have that background, you kind of just shut out certain possibilities.
Sure.
Because that's how you're raised. That's, professionally speaking, right?
Yeah.
That's how you've progressed.
Yeah.
And so that's all you see.
Yeah.
And whereas if you weren't coming from that area, the sky's the limit. You're going to ask questions all around. And that makes a more effective coach.
If you were a Scrum Master with management like that, what can you do to deal with those biases? What can you do to start chipping away at I don't even know if making the people aware of their biases, I would think, would be step one. But like that would not be appreciated in some development run shops.
It wouldn't. And it also assumes that you actually have you actually have the freedom to be able to express that, right?
Right.
So oftentimes you're given responsibility, but when you want to try and coach up, as it's known, most Scrum Masters don't feel comfortable doing that, because they feel like they're out of their league trying to speak with these people that are in leadership roles potentially, or at least middle management roles that, is in a matrix environment, they would be managers at least. And so for a Scrum Master to be pushing at them saying, this is what I'm trying to do, that is very uncomfortable oftentimes. However, a seasoned Scrum Master, what they would do is simply act as this is where the difference is, I believe, from mentoring to coaching. So you wouldn't want to just immediately go and start mentoring those people.
Yeah.
Right? Because A, they're not expecting it, and they're going to just shut you out.
Yeah.
And B, you're not even prepared for that experience of mentoring them yet, because you've never done the job that they are doing right now.
Yeah, no.
You're much better off coming from the perspective of coaching, saying, here's a viewpoint, I understand where you're coming from, right? However, please hear me out. This is where I'm coming from, right? And this is what I believe I need to do my job successfully. Now, where you can swap your hat again to be a mentor is to say, I've done this before and it has been successful. So give me the opportunity to at least try it out. And again, I'm going to go where I usually go when it comes to this. Treat it as an experiment with them and just say, I'm not saying do this forever. I'm just saying try it for a sprint. You're talking 2 weeks. If it doesn't work, fine, right? We'll switch up. We'll go back. But let's just try it. Get your foot in the door, try it out, and then see where it takes you.
Yeah, I would expect a lot of organizations, it would be easier to get them to say, hey, let's try this, whatever it is, from the product person, rather than from the Scrum Master saying, hey, let's try this. Because if like in the product space, the big thing is, oh, you should be running all these experiments and you should be trying this and then measuring if it responds, measuring if your customers respond to it and then pivoting directions back if they don't, or going deeper or whatever. But this is like the if you follow some of the people in the product space that are more well known, that's what they'll tell you. Oh, you should be running all these experiments all the time, right? And you should be measuring all your experiments. And people kind of look at the product space and it's like, oh, yeah, we should be running all these experiments, but maybe we can't run as many experiments as you say. Like the Marty Kagan's like, oh, you should be running 30 a week or something. So like, yeah, he can do that, right?
Right.
Because he's like been consulting for 20 years, and the companies that go and get him to consult can pay for that. So yeah, but like all of us normal people,
mere mortals.
Yeah, all of us mortals. My point with this is they're managed by product people, going back to the business, and I think that lands with the business, as opposed to the Scrum Masters who somehow got lumped in with the technical people. And they're like, what? Like, what are you talking about experimenting with? Just do what I tell you to do. When's it going to be done? That's all I need to know. I don't need to know all these experimenty whatever. Just tell me when it's going to be done. Get back in your hole.
Yeah, I'm not going to go where I could go, which is this whole idea of where should Scrum Masters be sitting under, right? But just to bring it back to the point we're discussing here, the idea of experimentation certainly is much easier to pull off in the product space. Yes. But having said that, right, it is equally valid, if not more valid, in the Scrum Masters arena. The reason being, you're trying these new things with a new team, and you're starting with a new team at ground zero. Yeah. You're starting with forming. You don't know how they're going to work together. You're not going to dictate to them how they should be working together. Yeah. At least you shouldn't be. Yeah. So the idea of suggesting things to try for a small period of time, i.e. experimentation, equally valid. The thing is, I don't know that many Scrum Masters who actually do that, because what I'm finding is most Scrum Masters use the Scrum Guide and go, this is what I need to do. Yeah. Even though Scrum Guide doesn't say we need to do the 3 questions, I see people doing that all the time. That's all they do. And they stop at 15 minutes and then they say, we're out of time. Yeah. It's like, what happened to whatever the team needs? If you need 20 minutes, then go 20 minutes, right? So I'm finding that's the issue. I think it goes on both sides. Yes, you're right. Sitting under development, that already is an uphill battle. But then the Scrum Master should have an open mindset to say, I'm going to fight for this. I need this. Yeah, maybe one experiment is sprint or 2, right? That's it. But keep doing it. Yeah. Keep at it.
Yeah, that was when I was a Scrum Master, what I did, which was I focused on one experiment. I was like, well, let me pick one thing from a retrospective. Let's vote on the top most important item we all agree is most important, and then I'll focus my effort on one thing. Because most of the time that I've been a Scrum Master, it's been under the banner of some sort of development leadership, And I was like, I can really only influence one thing at a time. Development leadership's not good at doing multiple things at once. Like even though they tell the rest of the business, we'll multitask, we'll get it done, we'll do whatever. They're not good at it. They're not good at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And normally, we like larger numbers in metrics, right? But as far as number of experiments, we want to promote the smallest number. Yeah. And the other thing is make it visible, so it's either on a chart somewhere or on a dashboard. But when they see there's only one, they're less likely to come back and go, "Oh, you're spending all your time experimenting. Go develop." So just do one and work your way up to 2 a few sprints out.
Yeah, the other things, demonstrating how to, BA skills basically, demonstrating how to write stories, demonstrating how to write better acceptance criteria, user personas, organizing, setting up training plans, setting up lunch and learn, whatever will work at the organization, whether it's time for training or money tied to training or lunch and learns if you don't have money or whatever to deal with that kind of stuff. Lots of coaching, testing, and stuff like that. Obviously, if you have a testing background, it helps you get along with that. Coordinating with other pieces of the organization, HR or finance or whatever, to kind of help them be more agile or understand what how the teams are trying to work and how they can do their part to help the teams be more agile.
That by itself is a full-time role right there.
Yeah, this is still my list of just one-off list of things that you do when you, quote, only have one team.
And in your spare time, you should be removing impediments, which I always look at that and go, why, right? Well, the team should be removing the impediments. Yeah. If they can't, then you can escalate, but they should be doing something about it before they come to you and just say, I'm stuck. I didn't try anything, but I'm stuck. But yeah, there's just so many things that fill a Scrum Master's day, or could fill a Scrum Master's day. When you make a list of all of them, an exhaustive list, it would run into several pages, I've no doubt.
Yeah. Well, that's assuming that you don't have any kind of advanced skill set that a member of your team or another team that you're helping doesn't have, that you're helping them with. Like, for example, if you, as a Scrum Master, if you know how to construct a roadmap or facilitate sessions to construct a roadmap or facilitate sessions to break features off your roadmap and so, start breaking the high-level backlog down, and you have a solid handle on facilitation skills, you might be pulled in to do that kind of stuff to help the product team, because maybe the product team's overextended. When I was a product owner / manager, my ideal amount of time, a split between working and helping the development team and then sitting with customers / stakeholders, was a 50-50. I wanted to have a 50-50 split of my time. But I almost absolutely never had a 50-50 split of my time.
It was 60-70, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Actually, it was. When I was real early, when the team was forming, it was more like 90%. It was with the development team, just helping them and their new Scrum Master kind of figure out, because I was kind of the domain expert in both agility and in product at that company, trying to help them figure out how to kind of stabilize, get their footing inside the Scrum model. And then once we got past that, and we got some basics established, then we got to more of like a 30-70, 30% of my time was with the customers, basically in front of customers. So with executives, with sales, with support, with whoever in front of customers versus time with the development team. But I never got close to 50%.
I think the latest Scrum guide captures it well when they say, the Scrum Master should be coaching the team, coaching the business, coaching the product owner, right?
Yeah.
They're everywhere. So how can they not have a full-time role when they're doing all of these things, at the same time, trying to make sure that the team is healthy, the product backlog is healthy. They're also, I have no doubt, keeping their big visible charts updated and making sure people do their part there. What they should not be spending their time on is doing silly status reports in triplicate. That's a waste.
Well, it would be more effective if I was a product owner and I had a Scrum Master completely available, 100% dedicated to the team that I was on as a product owner. I would have them be helping me with stakeholder management and stakeholder interaction. I'd be having them help me when they could. And stakeholder management is both internal and external to the company. So we're talking about maybe they could come along and help me when I'm interviewing users to talk about features so that later they can help me write up, because maybe the Scrum Master drives in the meetings. A lot of Scrum Masters do that just to kind of help people out. I do that. When I was a Scrum Master, I would help the product owner by facilitating the meeting and driving the meeting, and I would type into whatever system that we had. so that I could free the product owner's hands to think about, to really think through and like pull up, because they usually have spreadsheets, and they're looking through their email, and they're looking, what I mean? So I just wanted them to be fully engaged with all their evidence and collecting everything, and not have to worry about what they're going to type in the, user story box or acceptance criteria box or whatever. I'll take dictation from the meeting, and they can look at it later and clarify. But the best Scrum Masters can help the product owner by extending their capabilities. Really, any team member could do this. But again, the Scrum Master, their role is to kind of help and unblock, stuff like that. They can assist in stakeholder management. And this is how I looked to try to utilize my Scrum Masters as in the product owner space, to help facilitate any meetings that are dealing with external stakeholders. Whenever I say stakeholders, we probably think customers, but I'm thinking like other executives, other departments inside the company. So they want to know, we need a demo of this feature, or we need to sit down and talk about your roadmap for a minute to look through the backlog. Like, we're not going to go into Jira or Azure DevOps or whatever to look through the backlog. Just tell us, when is this going to be done?
Right.
And usually they don't ask, hey, can we just sit down and kind of walk through your timelines? Like, let's take sales, for example. Sales or like a operations, like a support type of role. Either one would ask this question. Hey, can we sit down and kind of figure out timelines in case customers ask us? Because customers will ask sales and customers will ask support. I want these features, or this bug is broken. When is it going to be fixed? Do you have an idea for the timeline? And then sales will, of course, they'll do their little tap dance, because they're not going to give it. Sales is great about not giving an answer.
Sure.
And then they'll come to product. Hopefully, if they don't go straight to a developer and be like, hey, when is this going to be done? And they'll go to product, and product will have to sit down and work through. But the Scrum Master can read the backlog and the timelines just like everyone else. So that's something that a good Scrum Master and a good product person could collaborate on, to be like, hey, you take this meeting with these other departments and you provide them with the transparency that's already in the backlog. And then if they have questions, hopefully as you do refinement and sprint plannings and stuff gets kicked out of sprints or whatever, whatever's happening in your environment, hopefully notes are going into the work item. So the Scrum Master can just page down and look at the notes and be like, oh, it says here that this wasn't as high priority as the other things. And it says here that the product owner is okay with waiting a month to do this, because a month from now they're going to upgrade this machine and hopefully this problem go away, or whatever. Or he thinks that doing this other feature or this other bug will resolve this too. And he's kind of assuming the risk and can do it. But Scrum Master should be as much of an expert as the product person in dealing with the backlog. And they should be able to extend some of those capabilities, at least for internal stakeholders, to really relieve the pressure of internal stakeholders. I would argue a lot of times in the businesses I've been in, they can put on a lot more pressure than external stakeholders.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. So yeah, a Scrum Master should be doing that. I guess what you're really saying, I think, is a Scrum Master is protecting the team, because what would happen if the Scrum Master wasn't present on the team is, these questions would get asked of the team, right? Typically a tech lead, or then he may or she may actually have to ask the dev team.
Right.
So
they would go up the ladder and then come back down.
Right.
That's what
exactly.
Would happen.
So
Yes.
this is where a Scrum Master is protecting the team.
Right.
So they leave them alone for the time box to get on with the product that they're developing, and I can help with these things. But these kinds of things that you gave an excellent example of, stakeholder management, they can come from anywhere. Stakeholder management, internal reviews from technical leadership, for instance. Let's look at where you're at on the product, on the project. Talk about what was done the last few sprints. Talk about, they really shouldn't, but talk about velocity, this and that. So there's so many different things that can come at a Scrum Master, and they've got to be adept at making sure that they don't let things go down to the team, but field all these things, right? And they consuming their time. So this is where we're going. Start with, we started with, what does a Scrum Master do all day? Goodness, right? I mean, there's just so many things that they do.
We completely left out of all these conversations any kind of case where the Scrum teams are multiple Scrum teams and are all part of one program, meaning they're all part of one larger product, but there are many teams. And in that case, It's the Scrum Masters who can go coordinate at the program level, and then the rest of the team doesn't have to deal with that extra added layer of communication. So you're because most of the time they're just trying to line up landing on that aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean that's moving and bobbing and weaving. They're just trying to land all together at the same time. The whole team doesn't need to be, involved in that. We just need the desire from the program level communicated down to us, pulled down to us, and then kind of an expectation of reality kind of set back up at that higher level, kind of a back and forth. One person can basically do that.
Yeah, they're really orchestrating this at that point, right? Yeah, I agree. And if one of those, so if you're in that multiple team scenario, and if one of those teams is a production support type of team, well, there's a higher demand on the Scrum Master, I would say, based on the severity of the issues coming in. They've got to communicate. They've got to coordinate deployments, perhaps. So there are so many different things that a Scrum Master could find themselves doing in a day. And it's a fallacy for someone to say there's not enough work for a Scrum Master, give them another team, or heaven forbid, 2 more teams, right?
Yeah.
They just don't understand it.
Yeah. The thing I'm starting to see now is I'm starting to see companies that claim to be Agile, whether they are or not, I'm not really sure because I don't really dig in too deeply, but they claim to be Agile. They have product people. So they have product managers and product owners, maybe one or the other. Maybe they only have one or the other. I don't know. But sometimes they have both. But then they don't have any Scrum Masters and they don't have any project managers. Basically, they've gotten rid of the project managers, Scrum Masters. Scrum Master is like a role that's kind of shared by somebody else, usually a developer or a tech lead or some kind of, somebody who's a developer, basically. They'll, air quotes, play the role part-time. But all of these companies that I've observed this happening in, they all have product people. So I'm starting to see the first trend that wasn't really a great trend was replacing all your project managers with Scrum Masters and then not changing anything about the rest of your organization.
The title,
right.
That's it.
Yeah, exactly. And saying that you're Agile. Now it's, well, we don't need Scrum Masters because somebody can just do that part-time.
Yeah, so I think you're right. There is a trend out there to that, right?
Yeah.
We're starting to see more product people and fewer Scrum Masters in those cases. And I think that's because the funding for a lot of this is coming from the business side. They're not really seeing the value. A Scrum Master is a cost center. But here's what I would say to this. Yeah, I mean, whether this is going to continue as a trend and be successful or not, I don't know. What I do know is this. Say you have an orchestra with all these players. You've got the brass section and the string section over there. So what happens if you say you take away the conductor because, we've got this other person, let's say the percussion lead, who can now conduct, so in air quotes, conduct the orchestra.
Yeah.
Can that work? Well, maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. But the idea that some people say a Scrum Master's role can just be a role that the team can just rotate, right? So imagine now, in my example, right, you're going to have somebody in the orchestra rotate the role, give them a baton, and say, go. I don't want to be in that hall because I don't think it's going to sound good.
This is an interesting analogy that you've hit on right here because I have a bit of experience in this category. I don't even know if I'll leave this in because in high school, I played a bunch of instruments. I was in band and I was in jazz band as well. I was a soloist and I played saxophone. And one of the things about jazz band is it's not 100% always true, but generally speaking, the people in the jazz band are much better musicians individually than the general population of the band. And jazz band is that way. You don't have or need a conductor in the jazz band because what the conductor will do is they'll give you the tempo and they'll kick you off, and then it's the rhythm section's job to maintain the tempo for the rest of the song. Or you may not even need a conductor. The rhythm section could kick you off, with a rim shot or whatever to kick you off and give the tempo if they know what it is. But it's basically the band's responsibility to keep the time for the entire song. Now, that doesn't work for the band and the orchestra or whatever. It only works because the jazz band's a much smaller, much more proficient group of musicians working together.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. So maybe there are specific ways of working I'm avoiding the certain words here. Maybe this will work in, let's say, I don't know, I'm just guessing here. Maybe it'll work in XP or Kanban or something. But yeah, it's just certainly not a general solution necessarily. At least not where we sit today. Maybe in a few years, the teams can evolve up to that level where they don't need a facilitator because, most people on the team have improved their facilitation skills and they can prioritize and they know how to say no and things like that. Maybe we'll get there.
If I was in a company, let's say if I was a leadership team member at a company, I would be willing to be open to the idea of having like a shared service pool of Scrum Masters to say, I want to embed this Scrum Master with my team, one-on-one, Scrum Master with my team for X amount of hours in this month in order to train those skills. The idea is I have a bunch of jazz bands. To go back to this is, I guess I have to leave it in because now I'm going to use it over and over again.
Keep it in.
I have a bunch of jazz bands, right? I want them all to be expert players in their craft. Right. I want them all to be able to keep time themselves. I need to shuffle a conductor in enough for them to learn to keep tempo by themselves, and then I'll shuffle that conductor out. And maybe they only come back in and out occasionally. What that time period is, I have no idea. I can be completely open to being talked in or out of it. But if my organization is just completely unwilling to embed these people permanently, you know what I mean? Even if a Scrum Master is shared between two teams, you're basically doing 20 hours per team. Let's just pick a number out of the air.
Minus the multitasking cost.
Minus the switching costs, the overhead of Scrum. You're doing a bare minimum right there, man. Hopefully you're all working on one product, so at least you don't have to jump.
Right.
Yeah. But you're doing a bare minimum already. How much effective hours are you putting in? 10, 12, 15 hours effective?
Right. Absolutely. I do like the idea. And I think, there is a model out there where it's more at the Agile coach level where coaches come into a team for a period of time to kind of up the skill sets and instill good sound practices. Yeah. And then they kind of leave and they come back in periodically, right? That model's out there, but there isn't the same thing in existence for Scrum Masters as a role necessarily. But theoretically, that role could, at least, disappear. I can see that happening if the teams can upskill themselves.
I mean, I like sharing some recognized domain experts over nothing. Over basically being like, oh, my random developer on the team will do it this week, and we're not going to invest in that person's skills or teach them anything new. Or I like the shared model where the person's only spending one day with your team out of the entire week. I like that better than doing nothing, basically.
Absolutely. Doing nothing is the worst option because these poor developers, all they want to do is be left alone and to develop. So when it's their turn, they're just going to kind of pay lip service. Yeah,
well, to a point that when we were talking about off camera, is occasionally you have Scrum Masters who will come in, especially contractors who will come in and they'll do the bare minimum. They'll just check the Scrum boxes of I ran this event, I did whatever, and they're not participating as a change agent in an organization. They're not potentially risking their job by speaking up about going to try to change funding for the temes or interacting with HR to shuffle team members or whatever. They're not going to do any of that.
No. I mean, they're just going to cruise, right? Because they have their PSM or CSM. They sat through 2 days of it, and that's it, pretty much. So yeah, you're right. They're not moving the needle, really. I mean, all they're doing is, like I said, paying lip service. They're the kind of people that would be easy to talk into by these technical leadership people, right? Into improving velocity, for instance, and they'll just go along with it.
Right. Well, somebody said this a long time ago. Maybe my first entrance into being a Scrum Master is, the Scrum Master's job is just to make the problems visible, and whether they can help fix them or not is aside from helping make the problem visible. Like the organization needs to choose to solve their problems or not. I mean, the Scrum Master, if you're going to take any kind of agency away from them and say that they don't have the power to do it, depending on the hierarchy that they're involved in their workplace, which that's a whole different discussion that I'm not going to go into now because we just don't have time for it. If you're going to take any kind of agency away from them, it's to say they make the problems visible. And then the team together can kind of construct what they want to do next. And the team together can help. Yes, the Scrum Master's job is to be the change agent and kind of help, but the reality of most Scrum Masters that I've interacted with, and when I've been a Scrum Master, is you're limited. Very few organizations bring in a Scrum Master and really give you the scope that you should have. And very few people are willing to put their job on the line to go acquire the scope that the Scrum Master job should encompass.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So in majority of the vast majority, I would venture to say, right, a Scrum Master is given the responsibility without the authority. And so they come in and they know what needs to be done, but then they don't feel empowered to do anything because they're not going to be encouraged, right? They're going to be told to stay in their lane.
Yeah.
These things happen, right? So those organizations that say to the Scrum Master, since you're making these problems visible, we're going to empower you to find a way to fix them. Not necessarily provide the solution. Get the team together and get to a point where the solution can be proposed. Come to the table with options, maybe, right? Those organizations are much closer to truly practicing Agile in the right way than the ones that bring in somebody looking at some metrics and it's basically a single necked joke. Blame mentality, that kind of thing. Or focusing on the wrong metrics, saying, well, why aren't you improving your velocity for your team every sprint? Well, we all know that can be gamed. So you're right. They don't have the authority in the vast majority of the cases, and that is a crying shame. It's like, hiring a juggler and then tying their hands behind their backs and saying, go juggle 3 balls, 5 balls, right? I mean, that's what it's like.
Tying one hand behind their back.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I know. This has been a very strange topic. Like, we started on why I'm kind of burnt out on fighting the Scrum Master fights that Scrum Masters kind of deal with, and we ended in a very strange place. I'm not sure if we helped anyone.
Well, we ended in a place which might actually support your position there of not wanting to fight this because you don't have authority. I think your authority level is much higher when you're working with the product owner or the product manager.
Yeah.
Right?
I like the magic that we've kind of figured out along the way is, hey, we're just going to try this for a certain period of time. Like that non-committal kind of, you can get away with a lot. You can get away with a lot to say, oh, no, we're just going to try it for a couple weeks. Let's just try it for this period of time. It's just a couple weeks, no problem. And then a couple weeks turn into a couple months, and then a couple months turns into forever.
Well, if you get some success, it's going to be, see, it worked, right? So let's just keep going.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that's another good takeaway is the advantage of being in a distributed model where you have other development teams running side by side is if one team starts hitting success with a particular change to their process or whatever, the other team should see it and should start replicating it. And like if you're a Scrum Master and you have access to other teams that are doing things like that, you should be watching out for those breakthroughs in the organization and then replicating them as soon as possible. Because if one Scrum Master went out on a limb to try to do something, they've already done the hard work for you.
Yeah, exactly. So the risk is much lower for you to, take up that.
Right.
You're almost emulating. So that Scrum Master who is the forebearer of all this, what they should be doing is I think it should be part of their responsibility, is to evangelize their success, right?
Yes.
And that can happen in a number of different ways. That could be Scrum Master guilds or Agile communities of practice, for instance, right? But they should be doing that.
Yeah, set that up inside your company so you can share your wins. We had a whole podcast we did on that community of practice and setting those up. I can put that in a link. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't, but I'll try to do it this time.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, let's wrap this topic and move along. So if you have things that frustrate you as a Scrum Master or fights that you continually get in over and over again,
put them in the comments. Let us know.
Let us know.
Yeah. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button.
Hey, smash that subscribe button. All right.